Hi, if you're watching this, you're interested in U.S. history and you're trying to learn and trying to figure out what are those notes or what is this book saying. This is chapter 29 of Wilsonian Progressivism. I can't believe I said that. I grew up in a trailer park and I could pronounce that. That's amazing. At Home and Abroad, 1912 to 1916, we're looking at Woodrow Wilson. This goes with the American Pageant, which is a history book, U.S. history book for a AP or any variety of U.S. history books. So let's get right into it. We got a lot to cover here. There's President Woodrow Wilson, but you're probably wondering, wait, I just watched chapter 28 and we had a cliffhanger. We had Roosevelt, the president, or ex-president, running against Taft, the former or the current president. What about who won? So let's get to that. So the Democrats chose Woodrow Wilson as their presidential candidate. You have the Republicans divided between Roosevelt, the people loved him, and then you have Taft, the current president, who the business leaders and the party leaders enjoyed and loved as well. Now, Wilson was an ardent progressive, and he was the governor of New Jersey. He was for the common man. He did what he could to bring reform to the masses and really tried to help out. Hit the wrong button again. He's the former president of Princeton University. That's kind of a fancy school. Maybe you're trying to get into there. That's Ivy League. Ooh, I didn't go there. I couldn't get in. He had a very strong progressive platform. He wanted stronger antitrust laws. He wanted banking reform. Tariff reductions. He called this the New Freedom Program. It's the 20th century now, which is when I was a kid, and I liked the 20th century, but every president had like a motto or a name for everything. Roosevelt had the square deal. Taft had, let's get seconds for breakfast, I don't know. And Wilson has the New Freedom. He also, the Democrats favored small enterprise, entrepreneurship, the free functioning of unregulated and unmonopolized markets. Basically helped the little guy. But he did not support these social welfare programs of Roosevelt, which is ironic because Democrats today are more into social welfare and kind of helping everyone out and maybe higher taxes so we can have more social programs. But in the early 20th century, that was Roosevelt's baby, and the Democrats really weren't on board for that yet. So Theodore Roosevelt running again for election for a third-party candidate for the Progressive Republican Party or the Bull Moose Party or just a progressive party. And so he's running for a third term. It really hasn't happened in American history at that time. Grant was kicking it around. He kind of ran, but he didn't get a lot of support. And so this is the real first viable candidate to run for a third term as president. It wasn't against the Constitution yet. That was the 22nd Amendment, by the way. His new program is, instead of the square deal, he has new nationalism, which supported stronger control of trust, women's suffrage, universal women's suffrage across the nation. Women could vote in national elections, and programs for social welfare. Both candidates favored a more active government role in the economic and social affairs, but they disagreed how to do it. They're both progressives, but they don't really get along on how to specifically work out these problems. I mentioned at the end of the last video that Roosevelt in Michigan was shot in the chest during the last week of the campaign. He had a glasses case in his speech, and he diagnosed himself with a flesh wound, and so he finished his 90-minute speech with blood pouring out of his chest, and he took a couple weeks off. Like I said, toughest president we ever had. He used to do boxing and judo matches in the White House. Here's a picture of him as a young man, Teddy Roosevelt, patiently awaiting the birth of Chuck Norris. That would be an epic fight. We should make a movie of that, or a video game or something. Here's the x-ray of the bullet that was kind of lodged there. It didn't go and hit any arteries, and here's his bullet in the glasses case in his speech. And then, of course, we can teach history through memes now. I don't always get shot, but when I do, I proceed to speak for 90 minutes uninterrupted because I'm Teddy Roosevelt, baby. Yeah. Teddy Roosevelt, the reason why Bigfoot is not there. Don't tell Erin Flaherty. She's doing a research topic on that. So here's how you need to know for the election. You have the Republicans right here divided by the Bull Moose equals Wilson riding a donkey. Wait, what? Huh? So the election, the Democrat Woodrow Wilson won because Roosevelt and Taft split the Republican vote. Roosevelt actually had the third best showing for a third party, the second best showing for a third party candidate. I got the numbers mixed up there. In history, the best showing for a third party candidate was when the Republican Party was new back in the 1850s. Roosevelt got 27.5% of the popular vote. Wilson got 42%. Taft got 23%. And so Roosevelt actually got more votes than Taft. And if you add up these, do a little quick math, you can drop that decimal, but 27 plus 23 is 50. 50 beats 42. And so you can see if the Republicans don't split, they maintained the White House. His Progressive Party died out because he was the only candidate running for office. There weren't any elected officials in the state or local offices until the Bull Moose Party, who had the second best showing for a third party. That was in one election, and then they vanished. Bye, Bull Moose Party. We're sorry. So everything in red went to Wilson, which traditional strongholds of the Republican Party, like Wyoming and Idaho and Montana, Colorado, they went Democrat because they were split. Taft only won Vermont and Utah. Roosevelt won Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota, South Dakota, Washington, California, well, part of California. And so we have Woodrow Wilson. If you ever watch those PBS videos, they're 1 minute shorts on each president. Really good. I can't show it here, but you should watch it on your own. So here's Wilson. He's the only president in American history to have a PhD. He was smart. He was the son of a preacher man. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that old 70s song, The Only One. I'm not going to sing because that would be awful for you. He actually had a racist nature. This is controversial to talk about, but you know, it's history. Let's be real with it. He had racist tendency. He was the first president since the Civil War to resegregate federal buildings. He loved the film The Birth of a Nation, which came out in 1915 during his presidency. It was by D.W. Griffith. It's very controversial. Most popular film of the teens, actually, is The Box Office King. It led to the rebirth of the KKK on Stone Mountain in Georgia. That's not a good thing. Ooh. He relied on sincerity and moral appeal to attract the public. He, being the son of a preacher man, had this high moral calling. He thought that you should just teach people to be better through morals. He was smart, but he didn't have people skills. He's a college professor. You know, a lot of college professors are going to learn that they're really, really smart. They can tell you any random fact in history, but they can barely tell you what they did last weekend. Ooh, wait, I'm a college professor, technically. I coached basketball last weekend, I swear. Wilson's idealism and sense of moral righteousness made him incredibly stubborn in negotiating. He thought he was better than everyone. He's hard to talk to. He's pretty high-minded, and so he's difficult to deal with at times. I believe this is a picture with him and Andrew Carnegie here. Looks like they're at graduation, probably judging by their hats. I'm no detective, but I think I figured that one out. So some of the things he does. He was determined. So there's two parts of Wilson's presidency. Just before we get to that, we have all the reform, all the progressive stuff that goes on, and then you have World War I, or the Great War, that kind of just distracts everyone and kind of takes over the whole globe. And so you have these really good reforms that he tries to do, and then everything goes by the wayside. Not everything, but the focus of America goes by the wayside because of the Great War. So he was determined to attack the triple wall of privilege, the tariff, the banks, and the trust. Those were the triple wall of tariffs that kept the rich richer and kept the poor down. And so Wilson called a special meeting of Congress in 1913 to address the tariff, those high tariffs that Taft had actually passed that infuriated the Republicans, that led to the resurgence and the reemergence of Roosevelt. He convinced Congress to pass the Underwood Tariff Bill, which significantly reduced the tariff and allowed the consumers to have a little bit more protection so they could get lower prices. We like lower prices. We like things to go on sale. Also, it's under his watch officially. The 16th Amendment in 1913 is ratified, which allowed income tax. It was passed by Congress during Taft's watch, his administration. But to pass an amendment, you need 2/3 of both houses of Congress to say yes, and then 3/4 of the states to say, yes, we approve it, to be ratified and become an amendment. Next is the banks. The most serious problem in the National Banking Act was the lack of influx or the outflow of cash. It tied up. The monetary system was tied up, and it just couldn't grow with the economy like it needed. And so in 1913, under his tutelage, he passed the Federal Reserve Act, which is still around today. Wilson spoke directly to a joint session of Congress again. He appealed right to Congress many times to get what he wanted. The new Federal Reserve Board, which was appointed by the president, oversaw a nationwide system of 12 Federal Reserve banks. And they basically determined the flow of money in this country. If things are going really, really well, there's too much money out in the money supply, they will raise interest rates. And so people are less apt, or banks is kind of a bank to give loans to other banks, less apt to take out loans. So that kind of reduces the amount of money in the money supply and kind of slows the economy down. If the economy is humming or not doing well, and things are struggling, they need some influx of cash. They can lower interest rates and kind of infuse cash to the nation to try to stimulate the economy. If you take out a dollar bill, if you have any paper money from the United States and you look, it actually is issued by the Federal Reserve banks. They used to have like $1 bills would have a letter, like A through L or whatever, and it would tell you it was from Kansas City or New York or San Francisco. Each reserve bank was the central bank for its region. They were bankers' banks. They gave loans to banks. The board could issue paper money called the Federal Reserve Notes, or as we know it, the U.S. dollar. The amount of money in circulation could be increased or decreased as needed by the economy, and it was more on the pulse of the nation's economy, and so it could react quicker and help people out of tough times, or make sure that things are going not too crazy and cause a panic. And then finally, the trust. He passed the Congress under his tutelage or his guidance passed the Federal Trade Commission Act of 1914, which created the FTC. The Federal Trade Commission is still around today. A lot of his stuff is still around, especially the Federal Reserve, the Federal Trade Commission. They oversaw industries that engaged in interstate commerce. They issued cease and desist orders to companies that engaged in unfair business tactics. And then under him, the old Sherman Antitrust Act, which was very weak, Congress passed and he signed into law the Clayton Antitrust Act of 1914, which gave more power, more legal tools for the government to break up trusts and holding companies, which we're going to have a really confusing diagram coming up here. It also legalized striking. Strikes used to be illegal. They weren't legally allowed to not work. So laborers and farmers are no longer subject to the antitrust laws. That's a big win for labor. So what you have is this super holding company, and then they hold 50% of the voting stock in these other holding companies, and then they hold 50% of the voting stock in all these little corporations. So basically, if you hold 50% of the voting stock, you can control the company. You can vote who the CEO is. You can vote if they're going to build a plant. And 50% of the voting stock was just a small fraction of all the stock. And so it was like this super special stock you had to get, but somehow these holding companies could do this and they could control an entire industry just by owning stock in other businesses, the voting stock specifically. So the Federal Farm Loan Act of 1916 made low-interest loans available to farmers, and so they were not so desperate and not so tied to banks that if their crops failed or if prices fluctuated, they would lose their farm. The Warehouse Act of 1916 enabled farmers to take out loans against the value of their staple crops, which were then stored in government houses. So really trying to make sure that farmers didn't lose everything because they are the backbone of the nation. They feed the world. They feed our country. You have the La Follette-Siemens Act of 1915, which benefited sailors by requiring decent treatment and a living wage on American ships. Because they were offshore, they're in international waters. Apparently, they could do whatever they wanted in terms of you can sleep out in the rain and the waves and not get paid a lot. And so it kind of protected those sailors. Wilson also assisted in passing the Working Men's Compensation Act. If you're injured on the job, they should pay for your medical costs. They also should help cover your wages if you were hurt and it wasn't your fault. Also in 1916, the president approved the act restricting child labor on products flowing into interstate commerce, using the federal legal arms to make sure kids aren't working too much. You have the Adamson Act of 1916, which established an 8-hour workday for all employees on trains in interstate commerce. So since interstate commerce was regulated by the federal government went after it. 8-hour workday, no child labor laws. He also nominated Louis D. Brandeis as to the Supreme Court. He was a progressive reformer. He was the first Jewish man to ever become a Supreme Court justice. And the heading of this is the high tide. This is where progressivism reaches its peak. It's the most reform we're going to get. Because if you look at the date of these, 1915, 1916, oh boy, World War I's raging. It started in 1914, and the United States are going to be slowly pulled into it. It's kind of catching the attention of the U.S. Officially, the U.S. will join it in 1917. That's all we have for today. If you have any questions,